Yasuhise Hara has created one of the best manga of all time, and my personal favorite. And out of the plethora of reasons why it's so outstanding, the main reason is the way Shin, the main character of the story, is written. We are close to 800 chapters in, and we are now entering the cusp of Shin going from an up-and-coming general with great talent to the title of one of the 6 greats. The title of Great General does not come easy. Only those the heavens favor stand even the slightest chance of claiming it. And Shin has come a long way from the rebellious little war orphan working as a slave and sleeping in a shack to a general leading a 30,000 man army going up against the likes of Ribuku and owning his own estate. I'm sure that any reader of Kingdom will be eager to tell you that Shin is a lot more complex than he may appear to be upon first glance. From the very beginning, Shin is not as he seems. It's very easy to make face value judgments just from his exterior appearance alone. His imposing character design, his weapon too heavy to be called a simple glaive, and his naivish kiddish attitude all attribute into thinking he's nothing more than a violent dream chaser archetypal character. And to be fair, Shin does follow through with some of these traits as evidenced by his unrelenting thirst for battle to climb higher than any other general in history. But this is where all the similarities end. While in the same way the simplistic character traits characterize Shin to people who haven't read Kingdom or to the people in the series who only know him as a slave turned general, in reality these traits in no way define Shin. They fail to capture his humanity. There's obviously a lot more to Shin than just his violent traits, naivete, and his goofy ponytail that I hate every time I see it. He is a deeply existential character who is more than capable of showing compassion, empathy, loyalty, thoughtfulness, and most importantly, an indomitable human spirit. So in this video, I'll show you why Shin is one of the best written protagonists from a storytelling perspective. And then I'll do a deep dive into his character and in what my opinion makes him better than so many other main characters. Okay, so let's first start with the premise of Kingdom. According to Writer's Digest, a magazine that I can't actually believe exists, the premise of a story is the entire story expressed as simply as possible. A good premise should contain some sort of starting point, a sense of the main character, and some sense of the ending like a goal or motivation to move the story along. Okay, so now I have to boil down roughly 800 chapters of story into one sentence. No problem. So the premise of Kingdom, I say, is this. A strong-willed and pure young man sets out to carve his name into the annals of history as the greatest general under the heavens by uniting all of China during the spring and autumn warring states period. Yeah, that about sums it up. Now on the most fundamental level, the premise is the most important part of a story. What you write about is way more impactful than how you write it. And what makes a premise good is not only the setting and idea, but especially a main character that goes hand in hand with the plot. And this is what Yasuhise Hara did with Kingdom. Sure, he had help from the records of the Grand Historian. After all, this manga does hold true historical events, but it's what Yasuhise Hara is able to build off of with these events that make him such a brilliant writer. Shin makes the story better, and the story makes Shin better. They organically enhance each other. Let me explain. As any good story, Kingdom has an underlying message that the author wants to convey. Now, Kingdom has many leading themes: friendship, justice, vengeance, perseverance, morality. It's a long list that will be discussed over another video, but what is the main overarching theme of Kingdom? Well, in chapter 241 and 480, we get a clear understanding and answer to this question. In 241, Renpa, a former general of Zhao's 3 Great Heavens, explains that the only way to surpass the perfect warring era that was set by his generation is to complete a feat never done before in history: the unification of all of China. Then in 480, Shin explains to the Haishin unit, and by extension us, what this manga is all about. As a boy, he would spend every day talking to Hyo about generals making a name for themselves across battlefields, and how strong and cool and great a real great general of the heavens must be. It's because of these conversations these two boys had, who knew nothing about war, that Shin built an image of a bright, shining general with no dark corners to be had. Countless times, Shin is faced with the reality of war and the darkness that comes with it, but he never falters from this shining general image. It was because of this ideal that gave Shin purpose, to become the greatest general under the heavens. This is the overarching theme of Kingdom. unity. Like I said before, Shin makes the story better and the story makes Shin better. The world of Kingdom is one of never-ending violence, and because of this, it spawned people like Kanki and Hoken. Only through unity does this world have a chance at peace. Only through unity does Shin reach his goal of the greatest general under the heavens. Yasuhise Hara has integrated all these other ideals and values in the fundamental message of Kingdom. Why unity is so valuable and why you should fight for it. With unity comes peace, and after 500 years of a non-stop war, that sounds pretty damn good. With unity comes freedom, to be unharmed and hurt by others. With unity comes the end of kings and queens and the beginning of all governed equally under law. But in the meantime, unity means a chance for Shin to make a name for himself. I believe it's perfectly clear that Shin's main drive and desire in the story is to surpass all those so-called greats before him. That may sound profound, but it's exactly this seamlessness that makes the story work so well. Because this theme of unity is woven into every single part of the plot, every single part of the world, and in each and every character in the story. You never notice it or really think about it because it's everywhere. The entire story is taking place under this premise. Compare this to someone like Eren. For the longest time, the story of Attack on Titan makes us believe that this is a story about humanity's fight for survival and freedom, and how courage and sacrifice will lead you to true freedoms from the Titans, Marley, and Eldians alike. But suddenly, the main character, who has fought and yearned for freedom more so than anyone else, says he had no choice but to follow the future that he saw. That he became stupid with power and couldn't stop himself. And worst of all, this explanation that makes no fucking sense.
なんで味方なの?
そりゃ始祖ユミルにしかわからねえよ。
What I'm trying to say is Eren became a slave to freedom, which basically completely undermined this basic message, which is exactly why people were so unhappy with its ending. Eren in the beginning was clearly the best fit for this role of freedom, but was he really the one that best represented the theme of the story? With Shin, Yasuhise Hara chose the most interesting and relevant character when it comes to exploring unity. Shin is the story, literally. But not only Shin embodies this central moral argument, all of the villains and antagonists he faces along the way, as incredibly diverse as they may look and as different as their ambitions might be, all of them, without any exception I can think of, stand opposed to the ideal of unity in some way or form. Villains like Chancellor Ryofui and Biki, who controlled and manipulated all of Kin. Villains like Kanki, who see no problem in hurting the weak and innocent simply because they can. Or Riboku, who wants to stop unity just because he's too weak-willed to do it himself. Or the time 5 out of the 7 warring states came together with a coalition army to wipe Kin off the map just because they feared Kin's idea of unity. Let me tell you this, consistency in the main values and ideals that are clashing in the story is such a fundamental aspect of storytelling, but really hard to do right. And yet, neither the antagonist nor Shin ever do anything that really feels out of character and strives away from these ideals. This consistency represents Shin in such a clear and tangible way that it makes him feel like a very three-dimensional and authentic character. But even from his function as a main protagonist, Shin differs from the trope of the typical hero in a battle-centered manga. Typically, we have the main character who starts at the bottom, gives us the typical coming-of-age type of story arc where the protagonist is an outsider or the underdog, and uses their talents or unique powers to work their way up to the top. Goku wants to be the strongest. Asta wants attention, I guess, and Naruto wants acceptance. Shin, however, doesn't want to become the greatest general under the heavens for any of those reasons. He simply wants to achieve the dream he and his brother would talk about every day as children. And so I would argue that the greatest general under the heavens is quite different from the Hokages and the Wizard Kings out there, as they bind the hero's fulfillment to external forces. When it comes to the greatest general under the heavens, it's a goal that doesn't require Shin to be the strongest with some crazy power, but simply to be strong enough with support of his unit. On the other hand, we have the trope of the overpowered main character that's basically already strong but has to grow on a more human level and figure out a more internal struggle. Examples of this would be Gojo, Saitama, or Gon. Now, while Shin is definitely way more advanced in skills at the start of the story than someone like a Naruto or Luffy, Shin is also far away from being as overpowered overpowered as this type of character. Instead, he's introduced with a considerate amount of strength that is then quickly tested by stronger and stronger opponents and opens up a lot of room for growth. What makes Shin so different from the other heroes is mainly his main character arc. Shin doesn't have to grow up and prove himself to others. Compared to the Bakugos and Astas out there, he is deeply respected by his unit and all those around him. Shin actually starts the story not as the underdog, but as the protector and leader. All throughout the first arc, he goes around throwing and killing anyone who tries to hurt the king. In other words, his character arc is not that of boy to man, but man to leader. Shin's underlying arc to achieve his goal is to become a better leader and protector. Given the length of the story, you would be surprised at the speed of developments. But this is a manga about war and death, so Shin is no novice to loss. First, his brother, then his mentor, not to mention the members of the unit he lost along the way. But Shin doesn't go on an insane rampage like those around him. He breaks down in shock and trauma like a real person would. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think either of these approaches is better than the other. What matters is that this unique arc is completely aligned with the premise of the story. That's why it works so much smoother than many other popular series, at least I think so. I would say simply from a story structure, the setup and premise of his character puts him way above other manga heroes. I mean, just look at this. This is the story. This guy unites everything Kingdom is about. In other words, a protagonist that goes down as one of the greatest of all time. Shin is a total idiot with no character development. When he's not giving some sappy speech, he's making a fool of himself, and how can a guy who is in constant warfare still have the same childish outlook on life? These are the arguments I often hear from people whose total IQ is 10. In the first half of this video, I made the case why Shin is one of the best protagonists in fiction from a storytelling perspective. Now for this half of the video, it's going to be a more personal perspective. Basically why I personally find Shin to be a very relatable character and a fantastic role model. Now for obvious reasons, this half of the video is going to be a lot more subjective because people are drawn to different personalities. Nonetheless, I'm convinced I found the reason why I'm so drawn to him and the overall story so much. And so after this video, the next time someone disrespects you on your god tier taste in main characters, you'll know exactly what to tell them. Okay, first of all, let's deal with the common point of criticism about Shin as a person. Is Shin dumb? Short answer, absolutely. I feel like I'm losing brain cells watching this man go through life. In fact, he knows close to nothing about mannerisms and politics. And even on a much more fundamental level, he's not even able to see through the most basic of disguises. Looking at Shin from a purely academic perspective, this guy is no Einstein. So for someone who pays attention to Kingdom very loosely and sporadically, it's only natural that this idiotic and naive side of Shin seems to be all there is to him. However, as we all know, there are many different forms of intelligence. And while Shin clearly lacks in a number of areas, he is an absolute genius when it comes to social and emotional intelligence. That I would argue is just as crucial, if not more so, than intellectual intelligence. I feel like that's kind of the trope for a lot of main characters in manga, and I think that's exactly what sets him apart from many other protagonists. Shin is well aware of his true self, and that of those around him right from the start. He knows exactly what he can and can't do. That's why he surrounds himself with so many different types of people. They all make up for his weaknesses. Shin's emotional intelligence allows him to understand more about people around him than they do themselves. He's fantastic at identifying people's true feelings and intentions, what's driving them and what's holding them back. And he does so with friends and foes alike. And this is my personal favorite character trait of Shin. He is well aware that there are no heroes in war. It's kill or be killed. But he shows the same compassion he would to his friends to enemy soldiers. Shin may be bad at cooking or strategy or even reading the room, but he knows people. And that is arguably the most important skill any leader needs. So is Shin idiotic at times? Sure. without a doubt, but I would argue it's not idiotic to the point it gets annoying, and that's probably the most important part. This is my personal impression, but for example, with Usopp from One Piece, I often get annoyed with just his overall character. Like the time he left the Straw Hats for no good reason, or the fact that his crying and complaining is heavily overplayed, or someone like Naruto who stubbornly keeps fighting enemies that are way too strong for him, while Shin knows exactly when it's time to run. No matter if it's against Riboku, Hoken, Renpa, or Gaimo, Shin as the leader is prepared to buy time or even die for his friends. But he's fully aware that the best bet is to avoid confrontation. And whenever Shin actually decides to stay behind and fight, as Naruto does, he has to face real consequences. And this brings me to the second point of criticism. Shin has no character development. Now in the first half of this video, I stated that Shin's arc is about becoming a better leader, a better general, the greatest general under the heavens. His change in personality is slow, yes, but it's inarguably there. The reason for that is Shin is already a very good leader by nature. He lifts others up instead of pushing them down like many other characters in the story. Through his crippling honesty and naive nature, Shin builds trust with people extremely fast, one of the most fundamental elements of being a good leader. He also leads by example and has a very clear vision that aligns with the people around him, like Sei for instance, so this makes it incredibly easy to follow. So to put it simply, Shin is someone you want to lead the way when shit goes down, as he tends to do in pretty much every single arc of the story. So having all of these natural leadership traits already, what Shin's personal development is really focused on is losing a bit of his naivete and carelessness, so he can become a general that can actually protect his unit and their dreams. Moments like riding on the same horse as Oki or his fight against Mongoku are all about this concept. However, Shin's naivete and carelessness are also a big reason why he's able to do all the crazy things he does in the first place. He can't lose these traits completely either, so he never really stops dreaming. And for all his goofing off and recklessness, Shin takes his duty as the general pretty seriously. This is shown to us when instead of going to confront Kanki after finding out he killed 100,000 captured soldiers, he instead listens to Ten and decides to stay put for the sake of the Zhao invasion. Or instead of recklessly fighting Renpa, he listens to what he has to say in order to become the greatest general under the heavens. And of course, the time he seeks out Oki and puts a hold on getting greater accomplishments to enter his training arc. All of this shows a certain amount of maturity on Shin's part and his ability to make tough decisions, and as a result of this, you have very little character development. Rather, we see Shin giving out massive character development to those around him. And now that we have counted the two biggest arguments against Shin as a person, let's look at what I believe makes him so incredibly relatable and actually a wonderful role model to follow. Fulfilling the typical trope of most battle-centered manga protagonists, Shin has a number of extremely cool traits. He's basically fearless to the point where he doesn't fear death. He has incredible physical power and uses it creatively, a ridiculous amount of pain endurance, and also an indomitable human spirit. All of these traits are inarguably really cool to watch and see in action. But are they relatable? MCs like Goku and Natsu share these same traits, but they are so detached from what it means to being a real human that it's hard to identify with. Rather, I think it's those characteristics in Shin that make him so lovable, that seem to be the opposite of cool. Take for instance what we talked about earlier. Shin has a lot of weaknesses and actually gets his ass handed to him quite a lot, having weaknesses and failing. Now that's something anyone can relate to, and so it's actually the way Shin deals with these faults that make him stand out to me. The fact that he works hard and is willing to fail over and over and over, and that he doesn't mind openly admitting his faults to himself nor his friends, is what I find so admirable about this. I also love Shin's childlike curiosity and joy, something that, especially as an adult, I think deep down everyone misses. Shin also has an extremely strong and straightforward identity, which I'm not gonna lie is my favorite type of character. The Gojos, the Zoros, the Luffys, the Itachis, the Levis, the no-nonsense type of characters are always just so much fun to read and watch. Which, now that I think about it, is kind of weird because my favorite character in all of anime and manga is Jiraiya. Anyways, Shin knows what he wants, what he values, and who he is, and in the process doesn't take himself all that seriously. This is an incredibly attractive trait to have, as it speaks for a lot of self-confidence and sense of purpose and clarity about oneself that I personally find absolutely admirable. But maybe the most fascinating trait about Shin is his extreme altruism. Shin ties his happiness tightly to those around him. His strong sense of justice and fairness always push him to help those who need a light in the dark, and due to his compassion and empathy, his identity is based around saving people, friends, and enemies alike. Not only physically, but especially mentally. And he does so with incredible fairness. Because Shin is able to judge people purely based off of their character and not their appearance and manner, that's a skill the world could use a little more of. Everyone in the Haishin unit has an incredibly kind heart, opposed to the likes of Kanki's army. No matter how much they might have looked like a villain, for instance the Saki clan, before meeting Shin, every single member of the Haishin unit had been stuck in a dark place mentally and without purpose. The Haishin unit is comprised of commoners at the lowest level of social standing who are seen as less than. Duke Hyo's army joined Shin after he passed and was left with no leader. Ten, the strategist of the Haishin unit, is the last remaining member of her mountain tribe. Kyokai was on a revenge mission with no real aim for anything else in life until meeting Shin. And Sei's life was doomed until he met Shin and Hyo. Shin pulls them out of the darkness, rekindles their will and dreams, and gives them a worthy leader to follow, as well as a family to support them. Shin's ability to live in the here and now with an incredible sense of clarity and mindfulness, it seems that Shin has reached a certain level of enlightenment. It's all these traits for me that make Shin someone who is not only relatable, but someone who encourages me to be a better, kinder, and happier version of myself. Now real quickly, I want to talk about the moment that really sealed the deal for me of why I believe Shin is one of the best protagonists of all time. Spoilers ahead. After Kanki's death, the man who helped the most in Shin's character development, Shin was tasked with the mission to help bring Kan Pishi, a member of Han's royal family and genius of legalism, to Ken. Kan Pishi asks Shin if he thinks man's true nature is good or evil. This debate right here is what sealed the deal. Shin rambles on and on, not knowing the true answer, and just speaks his mind freely as usual. When asked again, he says man's true nature is fire, and goes on to explain all the situations he has gone through that question what is good and what is evil. Then he goes on to explain the universal thing that every human being has, the fire of life and the will of fire. I don't know if it's because I'm a Naruto fanboy and Shin talking like the third Hokage just ignited something within me, but yes, this is the moment where I felt Shin rightfully deserves his name along with the greats. I hope this video brought you some joy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.